Hello, welcome to our video titled Let's Talk About Eating Disorders, a personal experience from Naomi and Sarah. Hi Naomi, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
I'm Naomi. I am currently a student at university. I have lived experience of an eating disorder. Um, Other than that, I enjoy cycling, baking, doing jigsaw puzzles, catching up with friends. But I'm here today to talk about my experience of recovering from an eating disorder.
Thanks, Naomi.
Hi Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name's Sarah and I'm 26 and I'm a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. I'm also here today to share my experience with you about my struggles with an eating disorder, which was anorexia and also compulsive exercise. I don't know what else to say.
That's okay, thank you. So we just wanted to get together today and just have a discussion really about how our eating disorders have affected our lives. So what was your experience like of an eating disorder?
Okay, so I actually experienced it when I was around 15 or 16. So obviously from now that's almost 10 years ago. So for me, I feel almost really disjointed from it. Like I feel like an entirely different person. And I feel like in some senses, my memory of it has like almost been erased, which I think is quite common when, you go through quite traumatic experiences. So, I mean, my experience of it at the time, I didn't know really much about mental health at all. And I felt quite alone and quite confused, and I didn't really understand what was happening to me. And there can be a whole range of reasons why it happened, but I think, the main thing that I felt at the time, the experience I felt, was just like a big loneliness and like being really scared and not knowing how to cope. And I think now, throughout 10 years recovery, I think definitely there are like personality types and things ingrained within the eating disorder, so they can kind of transfer to other aspects of your life. So although now I don't struggle necessarily with my weight or body image, I think, it can transfer into other areas of your life, like relationships or your sporting activities or social activities. So maybe we can talk about those again a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Naomi?
So I also suffered from anorexia, which I slowly developed during the first year of my undergraduate degree after moving away from home to St Andrews. Initially, it took me a while to realise that I was unwell and to reach out for help. But then eventually I did. I went to the GP, which was the best decision I ever made. Was that first GP appointment, as hard and confused as it was at the time, that was the best thing I ever did. Reached out for help, was taken on by a treatment team who very much helped me to get better. And then from throughout my undergrad degree, I'd say recovery was like a slow process, but very worthwhile. And I'm now in a much better place now with my relationship with food, exercise, and other things that I struggled with whilst suffering from anorexia.
Thank you. So if anything, what did you think about eating disorders prior to becoming unwell? Did you have any preconceptions or pre-thoughts about them before yourself developing one?
So I don't think I really knew what eating disorders were before coming unwell. And even after I was diagnosed, I still didn't really know what eating disorders were, or that it was something that could affect me. So I think I had lots of misconceptions as to what they were about, and what it might look like. I think that I didn't realize at the time that they're so much more complicated than being about food or body image, but the root of the eating disorder can be so much more complicated than that. I think I also didn't really realize that they were mental illnesses, and also that they were something that I personally could have been affected by, when the truth is they can affect anyone. And yeah, the causes can be so complex, there's no single cause, but that recovery is possible from suffering from one, and the sooner someone gets support, the better.
Thank you. Sarah?
So I think, again, I mean, generally in school, I always think this, you're never really taught about, you know, mental health problems or, you know, how to deal with stress or anything like that, which I think could be really useful. So I think I didn't really know too much about eating disorders or what they were, to be honest. And I was really sporty from a young age, like around 7. And I kind of always prided myself on, you know, being strong and like eating whatever I wanted. And I would like go to a restaurant and always, I would see someone ordering a salad and I'd be like, why on earth would you order a salad? And then, you know, like I never really realized there could be some kind of mental barrier behind someone's eating behaviors until I experienced one myself. And as Naomi said, like it can be so deep rooted and so complicated. There are like so many things that can contribute to it. It's not just the act of eating. Like it is a serious mental health problem. And I think I just didn't know about them really, or the seriousness of them.
Okay, so how did you guys realise that you were unwell, or did you even realise that you were unwell?
So I think it can be really hard. So I think that when I developed anorexia in the first year of uni, I was completely blinded to the fact that I was developing anorexia. I think my friends and family, they expressed concern about me, suggesting that I should visit the GP, but very much at the start, I was in denial myself. But then when going back to university in second year after the summer, it was then going back to a different place, seeing friends that I hadn't seen since the end of first year, that led me to make a GP appointment and realize that maybe something wasn't quite right. And I think that can be quite common with eating disorders, is that they can develop quite slowly, and it can be hard to acknowledge the situation, which they can be quite complicated, and it can be hard to come to terms with that you are struggling from an eating disorder. But I think one thing that helped was, like I've heard of it described like when you're at traffic lights and like you can see that the light is green, but your eating disorder is telling you that the light is red, but your family and friends are telling you that it's green, and logically you know it's green, but you're seeing it as red. And I think I had to learn to like trust my family and friends that the light was green, and that kind of trust in them and slowly acknowledging it myself is what led me to the GP, to get some help for my eating disorder. So yeah, I had to kind of originally trust my friends and family and their concern above my own. And then that helped me to kind of rationalize it and come to terms with it myself. And as I started to engage in that became much easier. And I'm glad that originally I did trust them, and that got me to the GP. That was the best thing I ever did in my recovery journey. Was that first GP appointment.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not always easy, is it, to listen to your family and friends when necessarily you don't normally think that something's wrong, or you know the eating disorder is telling you otherwise. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I think I resonate with a lot of that. I mean, I think again it's going back to that thing where you think it will never happen to you, or you almost think like you're invincible, and you know, like the kind of severe side effects won't affect you. And I think I did have a bit of denial for a while as well, because I just thought like I'm fine, you know. In fact, I'm probably doing more than I was before. So, you know, like I'm doing a lot, so I'm fine. But and I think again, you know, like reflecting on what Naomi said, like if you can't trust yourself, or, you know, if you can't, you know, recover for yourself initially, like listen to the concerns of your friends and family and, you know, almost recover for them. And if you can't recover for yourself initially, because, you know, they're obviously raising these concerns for a reason. And I always think like you get very defensive when you're in that mindset, but rationally, if you think, you know, your friends and family, they're the people that love you the most, like they wouldn't be trying to sabotage you by saying, I think you're unwell, you know, that they're doing that out of the love that they feel for you. So it's kind of flipping that mindset around and thinking, okay, these guys really love me, they think I'm unwell, maybe I should go to the GP. And so I think for me, it was actually like within the same week, both my mum and my best friend approached me and, you know, said they were very concerned. But fortunately, like I listened to them and went to the GP, and I think, yeah. So in summary, I think I didn't really realize at the time until someone from the outside kind of aired their concerns.
Get a sense that you kind of you're trying to convince yourself that what the behaviours you're doing are normal. They're, you know, oh, it's only this, it's only a little bit, it's only it's not going to cause me any harm. But in the grand scheme of things, people looking on the outside in can kind of say, actually, that's made a bigger impact. So it's really good to hear that, you know, you had supportive family and friends around you at the time.
I think just as a note on that though, even when I did go to the GP, I still experienced like, you know, like quite a long time of denial. Even after I was given the diagnosis, I was like, oh, you know, nothing bad's going to happen. You still kind of have this, like, you think you're invincible almost. Because I know I still, you know, at the beginning of recovery, like I did get a little bit worse before I got better. And I think it's just breaking that barrier of denial, even when you're giving the diagnosis. And I mean, for me as well, it was more, there are like two events that I like really remember well. Is that I was in a car crash, like luckily everyone was fine, but you know, that split second before something like that happens, you often hear about, you know, time slowing down, and you know, people think about their friends and their family and like all of this. And honestly, my last thought in that like slowed down time was about food. And I was like, you know, this is not right. Like my last thought before I was going to die, like in a car crash, was about food. And so that kind of like reined it in, and I was like, wow, like I've definitely, you know, like I've got something wrong here. So yeah, I think that was quite a big moment for me.
It's quite shocking, especially when something like that, quite a big life kind of almost tragedy happens, that you're kind of a bit like you're shocked into reality.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned briefly about when you got your diagnosis and feeling in a bit of denial. How were you generally with that diagnosis of an eating disorder?
Yeah, so I think one thing that really helped me in recovery that probably answers this question is to kind of not take the diagnosis as being like, okay, I am suffering from anorexia, but actually remembering like I am still Naomi, I'm just struggling with anorexia, and to kind of split the two. And I know this also helped my mum, was like when I was being difficult around food or something, it's like trying to separate the illness from who you are. So remembering like I'm still a friend, I'm still a sister, and the eating disorder doesn't define me, it's just something I am struggling with. And I know that it helped my mum, and then it also helped me then to kind of face the eating disorder as well, because then you can kind of separate out what is the eating disorder versus what is Naomi.
Yourself, seeing those two things separate, that you are yourself and there are so much to you, you just also have, you know, this illness and are struggling with this. Sarah?
Yeah, I think I feel similar as well. Like, yeah, I think when you're given a diagnosis, you can question like how helpful is that, because yeah, you might be suffering and you need some support, but once you're diagnosed, it can also become a label and then part of your person, and that becomes like how you identify yourself. And so that can then restrict potentially recovery in the long term, because if it's become part of who you are, like you might not want to let go of that. So I think in some senses it can slow down recovery. And I mean, for me personally as well, I mean, in terms of diagnosis, so I recently last week was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. And so this is something for me now that I'm reevaluating my whole eating disorder, because I've obviously been struggling for a very long time, like unnoticed, with these like learning difficulties. So now, I mean, you know, that was never a part of my recovery or therapy, but now I'm thinking it definitely should have been. So again, going back to the diagnosis, it's like you could also like rule out other potential problems that are occurring in your mind, or, you know, anything like that.
Thank you. So was there anything in particular that either of you were worried about prior to getting treatment or prior to getting help?
For me, I think I was always worried about, I mean, because on one hand, although I was like, oh, I was in denial and I might not have a problem, on the other hand, I was like worried about being taken seriously at the same time. So I was thinking, like, I mean, I guess because you do have those stereotypes of people being in hospital and really unwell, you just think you're not sick enough and you won't be taken seriously if you're not X, Y, and Z. So I think my main fear was, you know, if I admit like I've got this problem, then what if I don't get the help, or what if I'm not taken seriously? And then, I don't know, it just increases the vulnerability that you're exposing to everyone. I think that was probably my main concern.
Naomi?
So I think like originally one of the first thoughts was like I was worried about losing, like at the time the eating disorder was, it was like my friend, and like a bad friend, but it was like I was originally worried about like, I can't get rid of this. But actually like the best thing I did was to get rid of it. It's just like retraining your brain almost, and like learning how to like cope without the eating disorder in a healthy way and overcome that was like the first thing.
Did you have any kind of feelings around recovery, or how did you deal with the thought of fully recovering?
I think you can never recover perfectly. And I think at the beginning, I was so terrified of recovery, because in your head, you imagine this perfect image of, you know, you're never, ever going to have a negative thought about food or your body again. And so it just seemed so unattainable. I think, to be honest, I guess like recovery is such like a broad term, and I think no one really ever explains to you what it can look like. So I think at the beginning it was just an overwhelming concept. And to answer your question about like, do you think anyone can ever fully recover? I think that's a really hard question to answer, because I think everyone's story is so individual, and it's almost like, I don't know, it's like once you're aware of these thoughts, you can never unthink them. It's like a bad memory, you can never unremember something. So I think it's always going to be there in my mind. But I think you can get to the point that it, you know, you can live with it and it doesn't affect you. You know, it'll just be like a fleeting thought and then you just carry on with your life. But I don't think you can ever, you know, like forget or have this like perfect recovery that you'll never have those thoughts again.
Thank you. Yeah, Naomi? So I think like originally the idea of recovery was quite like a daunting thought for reasons I said earlier. But I think that one thing was helped was like to kind of think that like my thinking and reasons weren't necessarily well informed because of the effect of the eating disorder on the brain. So originally it was like coming to terms with that. And then similar to what Sarah said earlier, like I was focusing on recovering for other people, not just for myself originally. But then as I engaged with treatment and recovery more and got a bit better, so was thinking a bit more rationally, it then became something that I very much did want myself. And then from that point, I think I kind of always had the hope and then the determination that recovery was possible. I don't really know where that came from. Just for me, I'd say in many ways, like maybe I flipped my determination. So instead of being like my determination was based on the anorexia, it was now a determination into recovery. And I think like it was a hard and slow process. But yeah, it was like that change, I think, and like remembering that when you don't want to, if you're thinking that you don't want to get better, then it's like separating those thoughts as like the anorexia thoughts, not like your thoughts. Yeah, and I think one thing that helped as well was like one thing my doctor actually said in like just my normal GP in one of the years in St Andrews, where I'd gone to him one day and like made a tiny improvement. He was like, radish by radish, you'll get there. And then I was like, I stuck that on my notice board, and it literally became like my motto was like radish by radish. And I think it was like when recovery can seem like such a far away big thing, like to break it down and think it's just small steps and we can get there by small steps. That really helped me to like slowly manage recovery, and it became so much easier and freeing as I went along with it. Like it was almost like a weight I didn't know I was carrying was like lifted off my shoulder as I took these small steps towards recovery. It became easier.
Thank you. Yeah. So what did or does your recovery look like kind of at the start and to now? How did you guys recover?
I think recovery looks dramatically different depending on, firstly, what type of eating disorder you have, and then secondly, how unwell you are and how quickly you can get access to treatment. So I think, again, it's different for everyone. For me personally, I was lucky that when I went to the GP, they referred me very promptly to, at the time I was 16, so child and adolescent mental health services. And from my experience, the child and adolescent services are like quite, I wouldn't say more equipped, but in the sense that you have a lot more support and the onus is kind of on your parents and your guardians to help you. Whereas when you switch over into adult services, the onus is on you and much support. So for me, at the time, I really needed someone else to take the responsibility. So at the beginning, I was lucky that I had a lot of support in that service. And in my county, they had community nurses. So fortunately for me, again, I had community nurses come to my house every day to take like my health checks and, like help me with meals and sit with me and eat my meals. So then for me, this avoided having to go into inpatients in hospital because the nurses were able to come to my house. So that kind of community support really, really helped me. And obviously that was very intensive at the beginning. Like I wasn't in school. I was at home all the time. I wasn't allowed to do very much while I got better. And then, I mean, gradually as you recover, you have like more good things come back into your life. So, you're allowed to socialize again. You're allowed to do sports. You can go to school. And then so little by little, you kind of take a bit more trust back into your own life. And like you're sitting in the driving seat again, little by little. And now, I guess, how do you know if you're ever fully recovered? I don't know if you can answer that question. But I'd say like over these past 10 years, I've like, always gone back to therapy if I needed it. So at certain points in my life, like I know I would be struggling a bit again. But because I've become much more aware of myself, I know that I need to take the steps. I'll go back to therapy or counselling for 1-2 months. And I just know it's always there. So I suppose throughout recovery, you just take small steps and get yourself back into the driving seat of your life.
Thank you. Naomi?
Yeah, so I think like starting at the beginning, when I first went to the GP originally, it was quite a delay before I was taken on by a treatment team, even after the diagnosis of anorexia. And I don't know, at this point, it might be worth saying like GPs should refer much sooner than I was, and I didn't have a great experience of getting into treatment. So if that, like, still go to the GP, and you can take with you some help, like there's a helpful leaflet from Beat that you can take with you that advises GPs that they should refer quickly. And another thing I've learned since is like you can ask when you go to the GP to speak to a GP that is good with mental health, and I've done that since for other things, and that is really helpful to know that GP practices, the receptionist often knows who is the best for mental health, and I had a friend come with me, which did help as well. But then a while after, I was referred by the GP onto a treatment team. So originally recovery probably looked like engaging with that treatment team. So it was I was treated as an outpatient in what's called like an intensive community team. So they had a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a dietitian, some psychiatry assistants, and it was a whole range of teams that would come to my house in where I was staying in St Andrews. And it was a case of like engaging with them, trusting them, being open with them as to what I was struggling with them, and slowly overcoming things and breaking down why I was thinking in a certain way, to get better. But I think the work that happened with the treatment team was only one part of recovery, and the rest of it was like when I'd come home from uni and I'd be back living with my family, it was then confronting things like dinner times with them and different things, like challenging going out with friends. And yeah, like slowly life after the treatment team as well, after discharged from them, went much better. It was still a continued process of challenging different things and situations that slowly led to recovery.
It's interesting how, you know, both of your journeys alone were so different through recovering and, you know, treatments and things. So thank you for that.
I just wanted to mention as well, because I did have like similar things to that, but I just like forgot about them. But no, what I wanted to say is I did have family therapy as well. And so I don't know if many people know about that, but it's not about blaming your family, because often when you throw that term out, you know, parents are like, oh, family therapy, it's the parents' fault, you know. But it's not about that at all. If there's like communication or misunderstanding, and, you know, potentially like a lot of argument or like tension in the house, this is just like a really safe space, and it's kind of like group therapy almost. So every member of your family has a chance to speak and say how they feel in a safe space. And this really helped. You know, sometimes people can be very stuck in their mindsets, including myself and including my parents. So it's about like re-educating both of us and helping us to see from the other person's point of view. So I think this really helped us as well, in terms of like the family environment at home, which really helped recovery.
So I think one thing that like helped also in recovery for me was like when I was talking about like overcoming things like going out for lunches with friends, having dinner with my family at home and different things like that. In many ways, whilst those were things I overcame in recovery, they were also things that motivated me in recovery, like to want to be able to be more chilled around dinner times with friends, to go out with friends, to on socials and different things. Like that aspect of recovery was also like my motivation for recovery as well. And I think often like whatever it is that you want to enjoy or want to do in life, like you can focus on that as reasons to recover. If it is like, I don't know, socials with friends, lunches and cafes, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's reasons for, you know, recovering are different. So thank you for that. Sarah, you mentioned about family and potentially like how parents feel blame. Is there anything that you guys experienced around either blame or shame? And if you did, how did you deal with it?
I think at the beginning, well, yeah, I mean, up until recently, to be honest, like the last few years, I did feel a lot of guilt and a lot of shame but then equally those sorts of like negative emotions kind of feed the whole negative cycle. So when I was kind of in the pits of my eating disorder, you know, you often, you know, you can be depressed as well. And these thoughts kind of spiral down because, you know, I felt terribly guilty that I was putting this burden on my parents and my friends. And I felt bad if there was ever, you know, like I had a panic attack around food and it was a meal out, and I hated the spotlight being on me all the time. And, you know, you just feel this incredible guilt, but then in a sense that could make your whole eating disorder worse because, you know, the depression and everything is kind of fueling it anyway. So I think it's super hard, but it's essential to recovery to kind of, you know, talk about it and not to feel that shame, because it's much easier said than done. But I think it's important to get out of those negative mindsets and emotions, because that just perpetuates the illness.
Thank you. Naomi?
Yeah, I think so for blame, I think like one thing that helped was like reminding myself that like eating disorders aren't a choice and they're no one person's fault, but they're like really complex things due to like a combination of, you know, genetics, social factors, biochemistry in the brain, all sorts of complicated stuff I don't understand. So I think like just like reinforcing that to myself, like positive quotes and everything, can really help stick them everywhere. Also like knowing that yeah, I don't know, I think, yeah, that's the first thing. I think in terms of shame, like again, just like the words that it's not your fault, I think can help, and like hearing those words and trying to believe them, and then knowing that like from seeking treatment and facing recovery, like that's a really brave thing to do, and it's like telling yourself all these positive things that like help you yeah, like what the eating disorder tells you might not be true, and that can lead you to feel blame and shame, but it's like telling yourself truths instead. And I think another thing that like helped with shame is like not being afraid to speak up about what I'm going through. So initially, like it can be hard to speak to people that you're struggling, if that be family or friends, and it can be hard to be open with them, but actually from being open with those who are closer to me, such as like my family and friends, then it got easier and it helped me to not feel so alone or ashamed for what I was going through. And then probably the final thing is like what I said earlier about thinking in terms of shame, like thinking beyond the anorexia or the eating disorder and not letting that be my identity, and therefore not being ashamed because I can focus on other things in my identity that aren't the eating disorder.
Thank you. And like you said, you both kind of touched on that eating disorders are so complex. There's not necessarily one reason that someone develops this, because it is an illness, just as, you know, some physical illnesses develop. You wouldn't blame yourself for that. So, you know, managing that blame with a mental health illness can be difficult, but it's kind of the same philosophy. So you mentioned about, you know, reaching out to a friend or family member or loved one, and how did you approach that kind of conversation, or was it something that they mentioned to you? What could you say to people that are potentially considering speaking to someone about getting help with an eating disorder?
So I think like talk to someone that you trust. Like there will be people like family members, maybe a colleague, a teacher, someone who you trust and you feel like it will be easy to talk to, or like a GP. GPs are always great as well. Like it's probably like friends and family, and then also getting medical attention as well are both like important aspects to it. I think when you're talking to family and friends, like you don't have to be specific or worry about having the right words. You can just let them know that you're struggling, and in many ways it can just be the first conversation of a series of many, which is the most important steps. I think I often, like, you can write down beforehand what you want to say. That can be helpful. And you can ask, if it is like a family or friend, you can ask them practical things. So for me, one of my friends at uni came sometimes to some of my appointments with me. Like if I was worried about certain appointments like blood tests or GP appointments, then having a friend there was helpful, and that also started conversations with them. If it is when making a GP appointment, there is helpful things on Beat's website with a leaflet about what you can take to an appointment and how to go about telling them. But yeah, I think the other thing is like not everyone will understand eating disorders and respond well, but don't let that dishearten you, and you have to keep talking about it and reaching out to people for support. Like you're still worthy of help, irrespective if people don't necessarily respond helpfully.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think the idea of writing stuff down is really important. Especially, I found that really useful because often when you're talking about something that makes you quite vulnerable, or it has like you know, a lot of emotions attached to it, you know, often I would just cry, or you know, you'd like forget what you wanted to say. So I think for me it's really useful to like write. I would often like write letters to like my mom or my dad or my boyfriend, because I knew that was the best way for me to communicate, because I could never think about it at the time. So I'd really recommend, you know, potentially writing a letter to a friend or someone close to you. But even if you can't even articulate a letter or writing, again, it doesn't matter necessarily what you say. I mean, I think the first thing I said was like, I don't know what's happening to me. And that's all I said. And, you know, I was obviously really like emotional as well at the time. But that can be enough just to start that conversation and to make someone aware that you're struggling.
Thank you. And like Naomi said, you know, not everyone might receive that you know, conversation well. That might be, you know, because of their understanding or their awareness, or, you know, many different reasons. But you know, believing that you do deserve help and not everyone is going to react that way, that might just be a reflection on where they are in their mental well-being or in their lives, to kind of explain their reaction.
Is there anything that you wish you could have said to yourself during the hardest time of this illness, or to anyone who might be struggling right now with an eating disorder? If so, what would that be?
I think for me, like the biggest thing that I wish, I guess, I would have known or was aware of is just like being self-aware. And again, that's like massive and really broad, but I was kind of like, I mean, a lot of people, I guess, are like living in a bubble and they don't really question their behaviors or actions or like why things are happening in their life. And now, like, through like trial and error and practicing things like mindfulness and meditation, like, and, you know, self-reflection is very important as well. And kind of learning why certain things might be difficult for me, or, you know, this situation makes me very stressed. And like learning new ways to cope with that. Again, going back to the school thing, you're never really taught how to revise or like how to deal with stress, or if you're feeling overwhelmed, what can you do? So I think just having that self-awareness could be really, like, just be a great thing. And just understanding that everyone's completely different. Everyone has different personalities. Everyone has different ways of coping with things. And I guess just understanding that and accepting that you're individual and, you know, you have different coping mechanisms.
Thank you. Naomi?
I think the thing I'd say is like it's okay to not be okay, and to need rest and to take breaks and to take care of yourself. Like it's okay to be vulnerable with people, to reach out for support, and to be honest and open with people that you are struggling. And I think that can be really key to getting better as well. Like originally, I didn't want to chat to the psychologist. I didn't want to tell my friends or my family what I was going through. But actually, like that was the eating disorder. But actually, like it was so valuable to talk to them, and no one thought badly of me from me being honest and open with them. And I think, yeah, I wish I knew that it was okay to not be okay and to be more open and honest with people and talk about your feelings much more than I felt I could at the time. Yeah, I think that's one big thing. Potentially also like, yeah, I think just like now, if I could look back and tell myself like you can get there and it will be worth it. Like in the moments when it feels hard, like know that step by step you can get there, and yeah, it will be worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that either of you want to say that we've not touched upon and you think is important to mention?
I always like the analogy of, you know, like if you were, what would you say to your best friend if they were struggling with the same thing you were struggling with? And often, you know, you would be really kind and you would want them to speak out and talk to you and you would be there to listen. But it's always really hard to like give that compassion to yourself. So I think, yeah, some like a good bit of advice I would say to myself or someone else is, you know, imagine if your best friend was struggling with this, like what would you tell them? And then tell it to yourself. Another big thing, because I know like a few other of my friends have been like struggling for a while with eating disorders, and I think a big thing as well, like a limit to recovery, is that often there's a belief that if you, I don't know, regain your normal behaviors around food or regain weight, if you need to regain weight, that people will forget that you're struggling, or like people won't appreciate how hard it is for you to deal with. But you know, if your friends and psychologists, for example, have been there the whole way through recovery, like they'll still be there. They'll probably be there even more when you've recovered. So I wouldn't, that was like a big limiter for me, and I know others as well, is that you would think like the support would suddenly disappear once you've like regained yourself. But yeah, for one, they're going to be there. And for two, by that point, you'll be so much better in your mental health and physical health that you probably won't need to rely on other people as much as you would anyway.
Thank you both for chatting with me today.
Thank you for watching our video. For more information on eating disorders and the support available, please check out the links that are on screen. These links are also going to be in the description box below. Thanks again.